There's a generation that learned very early that no one was coming to save them. They didn't grow up with constant guidance. No one asked them how they felt every day. No one explained their emotions. So they figured it out, alone. And if you've ever wondered why some people seem emotionally strong but strangely distant at the same time, you might be looking at someone shaped by that generation. Because the psychology of people born between 1965 and 1980 isn't loud, it's quiet, independent, and a little guarded. Picture this. You come home after a long day. You're overwhelmed, stressed, your mind is racing, and you call someone older for advice. They listen, they pause, and then they say something simple like, "You'll figure it out." No long emotional conversation, no deep validation, just quiet confidence. And part of you feels frustrated, but another part of you wonders, how are they so calm? How do they not fall apart the way we do? That difference isn't random. It's generational psychology. Gen X grew up in a world that didn't slow down for emotions. Many of them were latchkey kids. They came home to empty houses, made their own food, solved their own problems. Not because it was ideal, but because it was normal. And when you grow up like that, you don't learn to depend on people. You learn to depend on yourself. Pause for a second. Think about how you handle stress. Do you reach out immediately, or do you try to deal with it alone first? That instinct often traces back to how you were shaped. Here's what most people don't realize. Gen X isn't emotionally cold. They're emotionally efficient. They don't ignore feelings. They just don't let feelings control them. Because growing up, they didn't have the luxury to fall apart. Life kept moving, so they adapted. They learned to process things quietly, internally, without making it visible. And over time, that becomes who you are. But there's a hidden cost to this. When you teach yourself to be strong all the time, you also teach yourself not to show weakness, even when things get heavy. So instead of saying, "I'm struggling," they say, "I'm fine." Not because they're okay, but because that's what they've always done. Pause again. Have you ever told someone you're fine when you weren't? That moment right there, that's where this psychology lives. Another thing you'll notice about Gen X, they value independence more than attention. They don't chase validation. They don't need constant reassurance. In fact, too much attention can make them uncomfortable because they didn't grow up being constantly seen. They grew up being expected to handle things. And that creates a very specific kind of mindset, one that says, "I'll deal with it. I don't want to bother anyone. I'll figure it out."
And while that sounds strong, it can also feel very lonely. Here's where it gets interesting. Gen X often becomes the emotional bridge between generations. They understand struggle, but they don't always express it. They see younger generations opening up more, and part of them admires it. But another part of them doesn't know how to do the same, because vulnerability wasn't something they were taught. It was something they had to unlearn later in life. Real life looks like this. A parent who rarely talks about their own pain but always shows up when you need them. A boss who doesn't sugarcoat things but quietly supports you behind the scenes. A friend who won't text you every day but will be there when it truly matters. They don't always say the right words, but they show up in actions. And sometimes that matters more. But here's the twist. The strength you see in them is often built on things they never got. Emotional support, guidance, understanding. They became strong because they had to be, not because they wanted to be. And that changes how you see them. Because what looks like distance is often just protection. What looks like silence is often just unspoken experience. And if you grew up around Gen X, there's a good chance some of that mindset lives in you too. The independence, the quiet resilience, the habit of dealing with things alone, but also the difficulty in opening up, the hesitation to ask for help, the feeling that you should handle it on your own. So here's something worth thinking about. What if strength doesn't always have to look like silence? What if being strong also means letting yourself be seen? Because Gen X taught us something powerful: how to survive. But maybe your generation is here to learn something else: how to feel without losing that strength. At the end of the day, Gen X isn't emotionless. They're just practiced at hiding it. They carry things quietly. They solve things internally. They move forward even when it's heavy. And there's something deeply admirable about that. But there's also something incomplete, because real strength isn't just about holding everything in. It's about knowing when you don't have to.